Okay, so someone brought up a great question recently, a good friend of ours, actually Eric Kaiser, about reaming copper. More specifically, what happens when we use these different types of tools and when we actually abuse the copper. And when I mean abuse, I don't mean, verbal abuse. Or
bad copper, bad. Go sit in the corner.
Tossing it around in our trucks or throwing it through some mud. I'm talking about what happens when we use these tools, right? Reamer, needle nose, pliers, another reamer, deburring tool here, and then kind of like a swage tool from Navac, improperly. We're going to look at that. Actually, we're going to look at it in our digital microscope here and kind of cover the best practices. So out of all of these here, when we're, let's say, deburring for brazing copper together in a coupling, creating a flare, installing a mini split, anything like that, you're going to grab one of these tools. Hopefully, you'll find out which one you see and like the most. And you're going to grab one of these tools and actually remove the burrs inside the copper. Talk a little bit about why do we like burrs, Ty?
All right, so as we have that burr, the refrigerant's flowing through, it hits that burr and it causes disturbance. It causes turbulence in that refrigerant. And so some people say, oh, they're not really worried about that, but it does add equivalent link to the system. It reduces efficiency, but it also adds sound. On a 3/8 line, a liquid line on a system versus a 3-ton versus a 5-ton, it's flowing much faster in a 5-ton. There's more refrigerant flowing in that same distance, so it has to flow faster to make up for it. So if you have a system that has burrs in it on a 5-ton and a liquid line, you're literally listening to the sound of refrigerant flowing through. And I've had customers complain about that. I've had to go through and cut lines back open to deburr them to make that refrigerant sound quieter. But on the suction side, as that refrigerant causes turbulence across those burrs, you now also end up with the fact you're dropping oil out. It's kind of how an oil separator is designed, to cause more friction and turbulence to get the oil to separate. And we don't want the oil to separate. We want the oil to stay with the refrigerant all the way back to the compressor.
So the way I like to describe it is they're like little speed bumps. Right?
Yeah.
So we have this thing that's cut away here of an actual elbow, brazed from the outside on 1 1/8 inch. And you can see here where this copper was not deburred in the process, and it's created these little speed bumps all the way around the edge. And so as the refrigerant flows through here in the oil you're talking about, it's kicking it up off of the side walls. It's creating this turbulent flow. We want laminar flow, not turbulent flow, through the system, which again, like you said, affects total oil return. But let's talk about something that's a little bit more obvious than just removing burrs for the lack of oil return or turbulence. You're gonna get a lot of guys who say, I've been doing this for 30 years, Ty. I don't have to deburr my copper, or if I do, I'm just taking a pair of needle nose and I'm just kind of, giving it a once or twice over on the actual copper. And people forget, when we start moving into mechanical press fittings, we start moving into actual, flares that are brass on copper being compressed together in compression fittings. When you don't deburr copper, what happens is when you go to make a flare out of something that was freshly cut, you're going to find that it will crack. Right? Copper only has the ability to actually be malleable and change that shape when it's been prepared beforehand. And if you don't, and you skip that step, you're going to find the larger flare that you make on the larger lines that you make, especially on 3/4 or 5/8, that it will crack every single time. And that's again because we're supposed to deburr that copper before we make that flare. So, okay. So let's dive into what we're going to basically put these head to head. So let's start with our deburring tool. This is a classic. I love mine. You'll notice also in the backside here, it comes with actual spares inside. But we take these two and we put it up against the old needle nose, right, from the truck. You're going to see behind me here, we put them up head to head here. And this is my deburred copper right-hand side. Let me see if I can get it matched up a little bit better than that. Okay. You gotta see it on the end there a little bit. So on the right-hand side here, I have, needle nose? Yep. And on the left, there we go. Okay. So you're gonna see here that it's actually pretty clean on kind of both sides. You can kind of see a little bit of grooving here in the actual divots. So on this side, we have our deburring tool, and on this side, we have our needle nose. And you're saying, wow, that's actually really good. This is from needle nose. That's actually not terrible. But if we move it around here and we actually look at some other spots, you'll notice here on the back side over here, the violence of the needle nose, right? On the first surface here, you've got deep scratching across the surface, right? With the deburring tool, we've got a small controlled area on the left and the right. On the actual surface area of the needle nose, you'll notice that the striations and the burrs in it are pretty significant on either side. And the reason this is because with the needle nose, although it may be soft and round on the edges, right? This is actually a really nice tool by Klein. You still find that when you get those burrs off, we're not getting rid of them. We're taking them and we're squishing them against the wall with the edge of our needle nose, and we're actually causing deep scratches and striations, not just at the surface, but deeper into the actual copper. And so what does that result in? Well, if we scratch copper with copper, we create more copper shavings. And we just did a video on actual copper shavings and contamination in the system. So I would say I would choose the deburr. But you know, here's the edge of caution, right? When we talk about the deburring tool. What happens, Ty, when I've had 2 monsters and it's 8 a.m. and I've got 3 other mini splits I have to install on that same day? I get in a little bit of a hurry, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, let's go. Let's get done. Let's go.
And so what happens when you use something like this incorrectly, right? What happens when I apply?
You don't get the same results.
So we take this and I go, ugh, and I'm just gotta get this done. I got 3 more to do. I'm just gonna, right, real violent like.
You cut a lot of copper off fast. There's the burr, it's gone.
That's efficiency, Ty, okay? I'm getting this job done today. And you know what? That's it. Call the dispatcher. I'm doing 4 mini splits today. Give me another monster. You know, it's violent, right?
Yes.
So this is a tool of precision, and we saw that it was better than the needle nose. However, when used incorrectly, right? I mean, it's a lot of damage.
That's a lot of damage. That's a huge difference.
I mean, and you can see the jagged edges of the sawtooth of where I applied pressure and then drug it across.
Yes.
And so again, although the needle nose looks better than the deburring tool, but when I flip it around, when I use this lightly, and what does lightly look like, right?
Properly.
Yeah. I'd say lightly, right? I guess that all depends upon the person.
That's right. See, now you're still getting the flakes cut out of there, but you're not cutting in those deep grooves.
And a lot of times you're going to find that when you're doing this with some precision, with some actual decent pace here, you'll find that your shavings look more like curlicues.
Yes, they do.
And that's because, again, I'm maintaining surface contact to the actual burr and going all the way around the piping. I'm not getting off those giant chunks that we had before. Right. Something else I'd like to notate too is direction of pipe. Right. So when we're deburring, we don't do it this way.
Yeah. Right.
we do it this way. And again, that's because you know, you can see all the copper shavings on the table.
But what happens when you have a pipe that's coming up and you have to deburr it?
Blow it out with nitrogen while you're deburring?
Here's my trick, I take either a piece of foam or an old rag of cloth, and I shove that down inside of there. Not paper, because paper tears too easy, but I shove it down inside of there. When I get through deburring, all of those pieces that come down inside, I grab with my needle nose, now an appropriate thing for needle nose, I grab that and I pull it out quickly, and they flake out, they fly out. Good. So it keeps them out of the pipe.
Good. No, I like that. Okay, so we see that the needle nose, maybe not the best deburring tool. It's really nice, actually, compared to the actual needle nose, only when it's being controlled properly. Now let's go over to the actual reaming tool here that we have.
Now this is the one that I like. I've been using this one, and it's easy to work with. It's fast. I'm interested to see how it looks under the microscope.
Yes. So when we look at these two together, yeah, actually, I think it's better. So if you think about the distance, right? You can still see some of the jaggedness of the deburring tool, right? This is deburring over here, and this is our reamer on this side. You can see that the distance is a little bit cleaner. It's a little bit nicer. There's not that possibility of jaggedness throughout. I don't see anything deeper inside the actual copper, so I like it. I think it's great.
Yay!
Let's look at when we use it aggressively in a hurry.
Oof.
Again, it kind of gets into the same premise, and so one tool over the other, you could say I like this one better than that one, and they are both clean. But again, it's that deep hitting. It's the other thing I'd like to notate here is you can actually see we've taken kind of chunks out of the end, and so when we go to actually burr this, little divots here and divots there. When we go to actually turn a flare or create a flare, those are potential cracks. and potential leaks actually.
So you're saying that there's skill involved in using tools correctly?
Yes, I am.
It's almost like it's a skilled trade.
You know, it's interesting you say that because I have a lot of people asking about that. So again, right, and what do we talk about? We're talking about aggressively. Again, this.
Well, show the proper way first on one side. Let's see the proper way.
Okay. Right.
Yeah, okay. Seems reasonable. That's how I use it.
Yeah. Clockwise, counterclockwise.
I go back and forth. Is that all right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Again, it's about the pressure that's applied to it. And again, I'm looking at it, I'm determining it. Might use the finger test of just, does it slide without actually hitting a jagged edge? And then the other side.
The bad way. Don't do it this way.
You can hear it.
Yeah.
Sounds like a pencil sharpener from
It does.
second grade.
It does sound like a pencil sharpener.
And again, that's because what's happening here is when I go to apply force and I twist, it's a lot of pressure this way. And when I hit my range of motion of stopping, there's not as much force applied to it anymore. Now I'm going to go back the opposite way. And so what does that create? That creates those uneven surfaces.
That's a great point.
In actual
So try to stay in one direction. Now I did notice something else different when you did with your the blade style. You ended up with the curly Q.
Yes.
And then when you did it with this style, we ended up with a lot of little bitty copper flakes in the tool and also right here on the table itself.
Yes. Yeah, so the reason I like the deburring tool, and this is what I was trained to use, over the actual reamers, again, it's the particle sizes. So when we look at what's actually under this, especially as small as they are, it's a fine powder of copper. Now, which is okay, as long as I'm doing it in a controlled environment, I'm keep limiting my contamination to the point where, I'm factoring for what I'm creating. Now, the reason I like the deburring tool is because, one, I can noticeably see the curly cues that I'm creating here, but also, I can keep track of this. I can see exactly how much that I've shaved off. It's not a bunch of little tiny pencil shavings all throughout. And so, again, it's also user preference. We've seen the misuse of this and the misuse of this.
So I do like that when I have to acknowledge that these smaller copper flakes could be detrimental inside of a system. So we'd have to make sure that you didn't let that get into the system, or you had a way of cleaning it out, because that's easier to manage than this one. So
well, this is very visible, right?
Very visible, yes.
I can see exactly where the mess is. Let me look in the pipe really quick. Okay, yep, no, I see that it's right there at the tip. I can just grab it. I can pull it out. Good to go. Again, with these fine particles, I might have to go back and I might have to flush the system, especially if I forgot about it and I was in a hurry, or maybe the person I'm working with doesn't know what they should or shouldn't do.
Right.
The chance of contamination, I guess, is higher with this one. But again, if you're accounting for that factor of contamination or a factor of how the tool is used and preparing for that, then there isn't really a risk of contamination.
One of the things I like about it is the fact that it's less likely to make the copper out of round.
Yes.
You're highly likely of making it out of round if you use the needle nose.
Yeah.
Very highly likely. And in some cases, depending on how strong somebody is, they could make it out of round with this tool.
No, I love that.
Although, if again, using the tool correctly, not going to be an issue. But this one's not out of round. But like I said, the perfect tool isn't out there. We haven't seen the perfect one yet.
It doesn't exist. Well, so, and here's the other thing to that point. I've found that when I deburr copper with this, I find that the bottom side, where I can apply the most leverage in my rotation, gets deburred more than my other side. And so I might actually rotate the copper as I deburr it over time to ensure that there's more even wear. Because again, you're going to find it when you go to flare it. When you go to flare it and you look at the flare after it's come out of the block, you'll see that it's thinner on one side and it's thicker on the other. And that's not something that we want, especially not in a compression fitting that's holding back 500 PSI of R410A.
Now, I have not used this before at all.
So it's newer to me too as well, another tool from Navac there that allows us to actually take the copper, right, and see how it doesn't fit after being cut here.
Right.
But if I flip it over and I go to the opposite side, you'll notice that it's actually close to the same fit.
It is.
And so what I can do is I can just kind of lightly turn it as I expand it. This is what they would call a tubing expander. I'm sure someone might correct me if it actually has an official term, but that's what it's used for in my opinion. And so this is returning it back to its original status, right, of round after I cut it, and getting pretty close. The only thing I don't like about this one is that, again, unlike this where it's a perfect circle, I'm dependent upon hopefully making the right rotations and the right squeezes with my hand as I go, because you'll notice it's not a perfect circle.
So it's interesting. So this tool is actually an expander, but we're able to use it in a deburring application. So I would have not thought of that.
It didn't fit before.
And now it fits.
And now it does. And so now for this, if I wanted to go a little bit further, because again, it doesn't pass the finger test, When I say finger test, I mean be very careful sticking your fingers in the edge of jagged copper. That's how you get some
It just
deep
so
cuts.
happens it'll release red ink from your body and mark it.
We've been told that's a bad thing.
That's my dad, the sheet metal man, and he would say, "Don't bleed on the metal." So he didn't care that we got cut, but we didn't want to bleed on the copper or the sheet metal because it would corrode it, leave
But
stains.
for this one here, we can also look at under the actual microscope and find out how does it look and compare to the two. And again, it's a very clean connection.
Nice.
Yeah, it's nice. So again, it's not about the tool and more so about the technique. You'll see here, this is probably the smallest amount of striations from the original copper connection. However, there are some questions into one, making the copper too big now doesn't fit in the flaring block, because this is a manual tool, right? This is all about skill. Right. If I go too far or I give it too many hand cranks and I think this is some kind of workout tool, you're going to go too far and it's not going to fit in your flaring block anymore, especially if you put it up against another piece of copper. And it's also really easy to expand the copper, so it's one of those tools where you kind of have to get used to the use of it to figure out what it's doing. Now, we're not saying use this as opposed to any other tool on this table. We're just presenting the facts so that you understand exactly what these tools can be used for and what might actually work. So although this gives us the minimal amount of deburring on the actual surface here, you'll find that sometimes it can create or leave some burrs behind to where when you go to make that flare, it's still just not where it should be. So again, each one of these tools has its benefits. Some of them have drawbacks. Again, maybe bare minimum. If that's all you have, right, we'll make it work, I guess. But understanding what it creates and what that looks like, and then obviously deburring tool, reamer, and then tubing expander. So
how can I spend less time at deburring?
How can you spend less time? So we found this out the hard way when I tricked you and I gave you a really old pair of copper cutters to cut this copper.
It was not nice. You cut 4 pieces and I was still in the first one.
Hi, what's taking you so long cutting this copper, man? So yes, we have a tool called a copper cutter or a tubing cutter. And tubing cutter has a wheel on it. And that wheel...
It really does.
It really has a lifespan, right? And so the more cuts I make, the more I wear out that wheel, the more dull it becomes. And then again, the more pressure I have to apply to the tubing cutter to cut the copper. What creates burrs? What creates extreme burrs? Dull copper cutters, right? So it's one of those things where if you haven't changed your copper wheel in a while, this is the reminder that you should probably buy another wheel for it.
Yes.
A lot of guys wait until the wheel cracks or it breaks or it chips, right?
And that's what you call wheelie bad.
Where the steel will actually break because of something that gets between the wheel and the actual copper itself. So again, how do you minimize burring, right, without using tools like this? Fresh pair of copper cutters, clean wheels.
And also I spend a little bit more time cutting. I just add a little bit of pressure, go around and let the wheel do the work. I've seen a lot of guys that just crank down in that tubing cutter and the copper will actually be bent inward, even with the sharp blade, because they're putting so much pressure on it. And also that can egg that copper as well.
So the question I get all the time, how many rotations should it take to cut a piece of copper? Some guys say 3. And I think those guys have a lot of time and experience using these tools to get rid of those burrs.
Right.
What would you say would be the average amount of rotations? I mean, obviously it's a different proportion and pressure.
I've never counted, but it takes me, I take my time on it cutting it because I've learned the hard way when I started deburring. If you never deburr, you never see the problem. But once you start deburring, I found, hey, it's a lot easier going around that tubing cutter, tighten it just a little bit, going around. I figure if I have to use leverage or force on it, it's way too tight. So I try to do it where I can just do it with 2 fingers. When it gets like 1 finger loose, it's a little bit tight.
And we're talking
go around again.
Yeah, talking about creating a groove that slowly gets bigger over time until the point where the material completely separates.
And it's groovy.
It's groovy. Well, also you'll find too the guys where they cut it really quickly in 2-3 turns, and they show you the copper, and they're like, "Yeah, I cut it really quick. I'm doing this job really quick." And then you look at the copper, and it's like it's a square, or it's a rhombus, or all sorts of weird shapes. So you don't also lose that shape, because when we talk about connecting copper fittings, sometimes piping clearance is important.
That's right.
And so that also comes into play when we're cutting copper, reaming copper, brazing and soldering copper. All those things play a huge factor in it. So take your time, make sure that your tools have been maintained properly, that you have a clean wheel, right, sharp blade, and just change it out every so often. Don't wait for it to break.
Right.
Or keep a spare on you.
Yes.
If it's taking you 15 minutes to cut a piece of copper the right way, you probably should change your wheel.
That's right.
Shouldn't take that long. So.
And again, these are what we call best practices. This is a skilled trade, so practice doing these skills, practice growing in your trade. Like I say, it's not the trade of who can do it the fastest. It's not the fastest trade, it's the skilled trade for a reason.
Yeah.
And you'll hear people say, oh, I've done this for X number of years, and I've never had any trouble with it. Well, you don't see the problem, but it's still there. The turbulence is still happening. These other things are happening. And the fact is, integrity is doing the right thing even when nobody's watching.
Yes.
So maybe nobody will ever know if you were the person that did it the better way or not, but you will know.
Yeah.
And so you're thinking, hey, how can I do this better? And now when I know the difference, now when I decide to do it another way, it's a choice I'm making. Yeah. Now I'm having to make the choice. Am I going to do it a lesser way, and I'm going to take those chances and consequences in my mind, or am I just going to go ahead and spend that extra, half a minute to go ahead and do it a little bit better than anybody else? And so
and that's what it comes down to. I mean, if I'm in an attic and I'm in a tight spot, I may be inclined to rush the process, and when I deburr the copper, maybe I am a little bit more aggressive holding on to it. And when I get done with it and I go to say, well, you know what, this is not going to make a good flare, I'm probably just going to cut it out, right? It's going to add time, add frustration, but this is just going to remind me to slow down, right? Take my time, because quality is taking your time and getting it right the first time. And if not the first time, at least you're willing to do it the second or the third time, and you will eventually get it right. It's just that repeat, try over again.
And like you said, with the flaring side of it, we talked about the benefits of it and regular tubing alone, but in a flare, it can be the difference between a good flare and a bad. I've had people say, oh, I use a torque winch, I use all these other things we're supposed to do to make it good, and I still have these leaks. And we found a lot of times it comes down to how they're cutting and also deburring that copper. So when you're getting in there too rough with it, it's tearing that copper up, and that's your face. So if you use the needle nose and you're all damaged that up, or any of these, and you use them incorrectly and you get the copper all damaged and scarred up, well, that's also the face. The copper is soft and it makes the seal between the on that flare fitting. So if you got a bad piece of copper, you damage that copper, you've damaged the very gasket that prevents it from leaking. Yeah,
and to that point, that's a great point, is when we talk about the actual copper surface and being somewhat malleable, when we put it into an actual flare and tighten them together with the two brass connections, you've got to remember that, I mean, you get it weak on one side or it's thin on one side, and you apply the right amount of torque or pressure, where someone comes and bumps that line. I've seen probably 10, 15 flares actually break loose of the actual connection and block and blow the entire charge of the system. And whether that's under nitrogen pressure or actual system operation, it doesn't really matter. It was a step that someone skipped, thinking that they weren't hurting anything, and that it didn't leak, it's good to go. We forget that also copper, being a metal, is subject to physics.
Yes.
And that physics tells us that when this gets hot and then it gets cold, it expands and contracts. And so what happens when we thin metal and we expand and contract thin metal? It cracks, it ruptures, it leaks, it fractures.
Really, we want to make sure that you're using the proper skill for the job, using the proper tool for the job, the proper skill for the job, because we don't want to ever abuse copper. We want to make sure that we respect copper, because it's very important.
Yes, no, I always respect copper. I teach my kids also respect copper.
I sign that ticket and pay my bills.
No, it's good. All right, see you guys on the next one.
Never stop learning.
Thanks for watching. If you're willing, give this video a thumbs up and drop us a comment. Don't forget to hit that bell icon to stay updated with all of our future videos. And as a quick reminder, HVAC School isn't just a YouTube channel. Dive deeper with us at our main website, hvacrschool.com. Curious for more knowledge on the go? We've got you covered. Tune into the HVAC School podcast, available on all your favorite podcast apps. And while you're at it, join our thriving Facebook group. Also, don't miss out on our free mobile applications available for both iPhone and Android. We're all about community. For techs, by techs.